Hey friends, happy to be back for another Thursday happy hour. How's everybody's week going? Mine is mildly more calm somehow than last week. My hair is still doing what it's doing, but I'm just kind of going with it. I read somewhere that bobs were becoming lobs. I don't even know what you would call this. Tight haircut that turned into a nest. I'm not 100% sure. But yeah, just kind of enduring like everybody else is. Today's tea again, so I'm back to tea. This was my grandmother's mug, so thanks for looking down on me. Here's that one. So I wanted to get into the pillars today. So we have 8 pillars, the 8 pillars of everyday leadership, and we're going to start with empathy. That's one that I think is important. But to kind of lay the foundation, the groundwork of what we're trying to do here, I want to explain briefly the concept of everyday leadership. And I chose everyday because it's got, two two sides to it, I guess. The first everyday nature of it. Sorry, just trying to get that back on there. The first everyday nature of it is that it's something that anybody can do, right? I've said before that leadership is a disposition, not a position. And so when we look at that and when we think about it, we know that everyday leadership is something that anybody can attain. All of these skills that we talk about are things that you already do, but how are we consciously improving ourselves in the things that are important to make us an everyday leader? So average doesn't seem like the right word, right? But every day means it's attainable by anybody. And then the other side of that coin is that it's more of a practice. It's something that we do every single day. It's not just the way we are at the office or just the way we are at home or the way we are with our kids or our partner or any of those things. It's valuing these traits of leadership and working to improve them in every aspect of our lives. It makes us limber leaders, right? We can adjust to any situation we find ourselves in because we have this vast skill set to draw from, but that requires us to practice every single day to be able to do it. So when we think about leadership, I want you to think about it in two different ways. One, it's something that you can do from exactly where you are every day, and then also it's something that we practice when we take these micro steps, these really small interactions, and use them as an opportunity to make ourselves better, and then by extension, make the world a better place. So I'm going to start with empathy. Chapter 1, empathy, understanding someone else's why. As everyday leaders, we accept that the only thing we can control is how we act in the world around us. With this acceptance, we develop the courage to step up in situations that other people might shy away from out of uncertainty or fear. These are often the same situations we ourselves have avoided in the past. Because it's much easier to do nothing. In fact, most of us go through a time of doing nothing. It takes empathy, patience, courage, a sense of responsibility, and humility to do something. In this way, everyday leaders separate themselves from the pack. That's what this book is about. Empathy is foundational to anyone who wants to make a difference, no matter how big or how small. It might not be the first quality that springs to mind when we think of leadership, but it should be our starting point. Empathy is different from sympathy or compassion, and everyday leaders are different from conventional corporate or political leaders. When we think of leaders, we need to stop thinking of other people and think of ourselves. Think of the people that we look up to in our everyday lives. Think of our siblings, our parents, our really close friends who we admire. Those are the people that are leaders. Empathy does not mean feeling for another, but rather coming to understand another. For everyday leaders, the more we empathize, the greater our ability to connect and collaborate for the greater good. So if empathy is not agreeing with somebody, but just understanding their perspective, what would happen if we listened even though we disagreed? What would we lose? This paradigm embraces we. There are no sides, no right, no wrong, just different perspectives. For me, this concept of listening without judgment became apparent during the 2016 U.S. presidential election. My family owns a girls' fast pitch softball tournament company, and through this work, I have close relationships with the people who run a private-owned softball park in Parkersburg, West Virginia. I never assumed that I would share the same political views with the owners or the staff. I'm a lesbian from a progressive town in Colorado, while these guys are blue-collar, born and raised in rural West Virginia. I was likely the only lesbian they knew. Out of respect for each other, we avoided politics and our relationship worked. We genuinely liked each other. But when the Access Hollywood tapes came out showing the then presidential candidate Donald Trump bragging about sexually assaulting women, I assumed that anyone involved in girls' sports would now vote for him. What were we teaching our girls if we were putting our vote behind somebody accused of repeated sexual harassment? Or someone who acted like a bully or made racist comments? To me, these things are in direct opposition to the principles of teamwork and egalitarianism that sports are meant to teach. But then I had a conversation. Typically, I stay away from politics in the softball business, honoring everybody's individual perspective. But while raking the fields with some of the maintenance crew, I let out some of my frustration with Trump. There was an awkward silence in which I realized I had miscalculated where the crew stood on this candidate. Then one of the guys spoke up. I don't like what he says either. He's certainly not someone I want as a role model for my kids. But I've been working odd jobs for the last 5 years since the factory closed. There are no jobs here. He told me that he used to believe he could pay for his kids' college education, but these days he was just hoping they could get through high school before he lost the family home. So yeah, he's a jerk. He says racist and homophobic things I do not agree with. You know how I feel about that stuff. I adore you and your wife. You're my family. But he is the only one talking about bringing jobs back. This guy felt that Trump was the only candidate who was addressing his baseline concerns. I don't care if Satan himself was running. I would vote for him if I thought he would bring... I don't care if Satan himself were running. I would vote for him if I thought he would help us around here. With that, everyone went back to raking the fields. This man's honesty and vulnerability blew me away. He was not voting for Trump because of what Trump said, but in spite of it. He had even more urgent priorities than a good model for his kids. He needed to provide for his family. This superseded his disgust. When I understood his perspective, I began to see why some folks considered those voting for Hillary Clinton elitists. The fact that day-to-day survival was not my number one priority was a privilege. I didn't need to worry about keeping my house or the economic viability of my town. My livelihood was not directly linked to the profit and loss statements of a large corporation. I was financially secure, I lived in an economically diverse state, and I was college educated. I had the luxury of judging the candidates based on my opinion of their character and positions on social policy, rather than having to ignore that behavior that offended me because of the promise of having my basic needs covered. I certainly didn't see myself as an elitist, but I could understand why people might have seen me as one. After hearing the field maintenance guy and really listening to where he was coming from, I started to view people who voted for Trump differently. I learned one man's why, and my entire line of thinking about half the country flipped. It became irrelevant whether or not I thought jobs were actually going to come back as Trump promised. In an instant, I saw that my own assumptions were just as toxic as the stereotypes about me that I fought every day. I was a gender nonconforming lesbian, so people often assumed that I was a gym teacher and that I hated men. Neither were true. I also didn't own a Subaru, nor did I have a dozen cats. I knew what it was like to be stereotyped, but yet there I was, assuming the same things about this man in West Virginia and by extension half the country that voted differently than I did. So when we come down to it, this guy was a friend of mine. He was an ally. Did this one difference of opinion destroy all of that? Were years of connection and countless things we had in common erased because we filled out our ballots differently? I'd had beers with this guy. I gave his kids piggyback rides. And then we have this one difference of opinion, and all of a sudden all of that goes out the window? I don't think that's what empathy means as a leader. I think it's our job to be able to understand someone else's why, to take the time to make that connection, to understand what somebody else's perspective is. And now, as our country and the world wrestles with how we're going to reintegrate, people have very strong opinions and they're very different. And it's easy to stay in our media echo chambers and decide to make whatever decisions the pundits are saying, right? And anybody that doesn't agree with us is either ignorant and stupid, or they hate the economy, or they're privileged enough not to have to make those decisions, right? But that's not how it works. Sure, there are the extremes, right? We exist on a bell curve. There's some folks that think we should go back to status quo tomorrow, and other people that think we should shut down the country for a year. But the majority of us are in the middle, in that thick part of the bell curve. That's where we exist. So when we start to have conversations with people that we care about, that we have relationships with, and they have different opinions, let's get to the why that they're making that opinion. Let's ask one more question to get to the point of why they think that, what's driving their thoughts, right? And get to the heart of the matter. For the people that have different opinions than we do, maybe some of them are selfishly motivated. Okay, let's get to that, but let's not assume that everybody is. We're all dealing with different facts, and so how do we collectively as a group embrace these different opinions, certainly protect ourselves when we're moving forward, but make sure that we can practice that empathy of leadership, that we can try to understand where somebody else is coming from before we judge them. That skill of listening without judgment, just simply to understand somebody better, that's at the root of empathy, and that's how we begin to be leaders, to show that vulnerability, and that willingness to connect. It's not about being right. It's about understanding what it's like to be somebody else. So that's kind of the thought on empathy for today. If you have any questions, be sure to give me a shout out. This one was a little bit longer than I was hoping, but I feel like this one's pretty relevant right now. So I'll see you next week, and we will talk about the next pillar that we're working with, which is responsibility. All right. Thanks, y'all. Have a good one. Bye.